Because what I'm about to say is not the kind of thing you announce. It's the kind of thing you lean in for. You have been carrying a lie. Not a small one. Not the kind you'd confess on a Sunday and forget by Tuesday. A lie so old and so quiet that you stopped hearing it as a lie a long time ago. You hear it now as a fact, as your personality, as just the way you are. The lie is this, that there is something wrong with you. And here's why I asked you to watch this alone. Because if someone walks into the room in the next 30 minutes, you're going to change your face. You're going to sit up straighter. You're going to make it look like you're watching something ordinary. That reflex, that instant, automatic reflex to hide what's happening inside you, that reflex is one of the 9 signs. And we haven't even started yet. My name is George. I've been walking with people through this for a long time now. In small rooms, in kitchens, in parking lots, after church let out and everybody else had gone home. And I've watched the same thing happen over and over. A person sits down across from me, apologizes for taking my time, and then spends an hour describing something they've never said out loud to another human being. And at the end they ask me the same question, almost word for word. George, am I broken? No, you're not broken. You're rooted. Let me show you what I mean by that, because it's going to hold this whole conversation together. Have you ever seen what a root does when it hits stone? It doesn't die. It doesn't shout. It doesn't pull itself up and go find easier ground. It goes sideways. It goes underneath. It finds the hairline crack that nobody can see, and it grows into that crack, patient, silent, year after year, until one day somebody walks by and notices the stone has split. And they say, "How did that happen?" It happened underground. It happened in the dark. It happened while nothing appeared to be happening. That's what's been going on inside you. And every single thing you've labeled as a defect is actually the root doing its work under the pressure of the stone. 9 of those things. 9 signs. And I'm going to tell you why they cannot be shared, why, every time you've tried, it's come out wrong and left you feeling more alone than before you opened your mouth. Let's take them apart, one at a time, piece by piece, until there's nothing left but the truth. Sign 1. You feel most like yourself when no one is watching. You've called this antisocial. You've called this a problem. Your family has made jokes about it at holidays. There he goes, disappearing again, and you laughed along, because what else do you do? But think about that for a second. Really think. Why would a person be more themselves in solitude than in company? There's only one reason. Because in company, something in you is being managed, held back, translated down into a version other people can process without discomfort. And that translation costs you. It costs you so much that by the time you get home, you don't want to talk to anybody, not because you're cold, but because you're spent. That's not a personality flaw. That's the exhaustion of carrying something that doesn't fit in the container people keep handing you. Gideon knew that feeling. You remember where the angel found him. Not on a hilltop. Not in a temple. He was threshing wheat in a winepress down in a pit, hiding his harvest from the Midianites, doing the work in the one place nobody would look. And the angel walks up to a man crouched in a hole and says, "The Lord is with you, mighty man of valor." Mighty man of valor. Said to a man in hiding. Heaven did not describe Gideon by his circumstance. Heaven described him by his assignment. And the gap between those two things, between where he was and what he was called, that gap, was so wide that Gideon's first response was basically, "Are you sure you've got the right guy?" You've asked that question too. In the dark. More than once. Sign 2. People tell you things they've never told anyone. The woman at the pharmacy counter, who suddenly mentions her mother's diagnosis. The guy at work who's never said 3 words to you and then tells you his marriage is over. The stranger in the seat next to you on a 4-hour flight who starts crying somewhere over Ohio. You didn't ask. You never ask. And you've wondered, what is it about me? Here's what most people miss about this. It's not that you're a good listener. Plenty of people are good listeners. It's that something in you doesn't flinch. When somebody hands you the worst thing they've ever done, or the heaviest thing they've ever carried, your face doesn't change. And they can feel that before they even finish the sentence. Do you understand how rare that is? Most people flinch. Most people, when handed something heavy, adjust their expression by a fraction of an inch and the person confessing sees it, and closes back up, and never tries again with anyone. You don't flinch. And so you've become a place where things get set down. That's not an accident of temperament. That's a stewardship. Heaven doesn't hand out that kind of door to just anyone. Sign 3. You knew things before you could have known them. Not visions. Not lightning. Nothing dramatic enough to tell anyone about. Just you knew. You knew the marriage was over months before they announced it. You knew not to take that job even though every reasonable person told you to. You knew the phone was going to ring with bad news, and you'd already sat down before it rang. And when it happened exactly the way you knew it would, you told no one. Because what would you say? I felt it? Say that out loud in most rooms in America, and watch the temperature drop. So you kept it, and you kept keeping it, and the knowing kept coming anyway. This is the root under the stone. Nobody sees it. Nobody credits it. It looks like nothing from the surface, but it's the thing holding the whole tree up in the wind. There was a man in a congregation I served years ago, worked nights loading trucks at a distribution center outside of town. Big hands, quiet, never said a word in a group setting. One evening in the break room he told me he'd woken up at 3 in the morning 6 weeks earlier, with his sister's name in his mouth. Not a dream, just her name, sitting there. He hadn't spoken to her in 4 years over something neither of them could remember the start of anymore. He didn't call her. He told himself it was nothing. 3 in the morning, a tired brain, an old memory surfacing. 2 weeks later she was in a hospital bed, and he was standing in the doorway of her room. And she looked up and said the first thing she'd said to him in 4 years, "I asked God to send you." He told me that story with his hands shaking around a paper cup of coffee. And then, he said, "George, why didn't I just call her? I felt it. I felt it, and I talked myself out of it." Here's what I said to him, and what I'd say to you. The feeling was not the failure. The feeling was the gift working exactly as designed. What failed was the trust, because nobody had ever told him that thing in him was worth trusting. He'd spent 40 years being taught that only what you can prove counts. So the root did its work. It always does. It's the surface that keeps arguing with it. Sign 4. You cannot stay where you are not supposed to be. Some people can. I've watched them do it for 30 years. They sit in a church, a job, a friendship, a whole life that stopped fitting them a decade ago. And they're fine. Genuinely fine. It doesn't torment them. It torments you. You've tried to be content. You've prayed to be content. You've listened to sermons about contentment and gone home and asked God to please, please, make you the kind of person who can just settle. And He hasn't. Because contentment in the wrong place would keep you there. And He's not willing to lose you to comfort. I sat in a hospital corridor a few years back with a man named Ray. His father was dying 2 doors down. And in the middle of all that, Ray turned to me and said, "George, I've hated my job for 11 years. 11 years. And I keep thinking, there's something wrong with me for not being able to make peace with it. I told him what I'm telling you. That restlessness isn't ingratitude. Sometimes restlessness is the compass still working. Sign 5. You've been misread by the people closest to you. This is where it starts to hurt. Because a stranger misreading you is nothing. But the people who raised you, the people who've known you since you were 7, when they describe you, you don't recognize the person they're describing. He's always been difficult. She's too sensitive. He overthinks everything. She was always in her own world, and you sat with those labels for years, and you tried them on, and you started believing them, because if the people who know you best say that's who you are, who are you to argue? Let me be very direct here. The people closest to you have known your circumstances longer than anyone. That doesn't mean they've known your calling. Those are two entirely different things, and confusing them has cost more people their destiny than open opposition ever has. Gideon's own family had an altar to Baal in the yard, his own father's altar. And the first assignment God gave him wasn't a battle, it was to tear that altar down, in his own household, before dawn, because he was afraid of what his family would do if they saw him. Read that again. His first act of obedience was done at night, in secret, in his own home, in fear. And it still counted. Sign 6. Something in you resists what everyone else accepts easily. There's a version of faith being sold in a lot of places that is very smooth, very manageable. It answers every question before you finish asking it, and it never makes anyone uncomfortable, and you can't swallow it. You've sat in services where everyone around you was nodding, and you were sitting there with a knot in your stomach thinking that's not it. That's not the whole thing. There's more underneath this, and nobody's going down there. You felt guilty about that knot. You interpreted it as pride, or as a rebellious spirit, or as some deficiency in your faith. It wasn't. It was hunger. Real hunger. The kind that will not be satisfied by something pre-chewed. The root doesn't stop at the surface soil where the easy water is. The root goes down, through the hard layer, past the stone, down to where the water is that doesn't dry up in August. That's what's been driving you. That's why you're up at 11 o'clock at night watching something like this, instead of sleeping. And I'll say something that might sting a little. Some of the loneliest people I've ever met were sitting in a full sanctuary every week, surrounded, greeted by name, invited to the potluck, and starving. Because proximity to people is not the same as being known by them, and being known is what you were actually built for. You've probably tried to fix this by being more agreeable, by nodding along, by deciding the knot in your stomach was your problem to manage quietly. And it worked, in the way that holding your breath works. For a while. But hunger doesn't go away because you stop mentioning it. It just goes down deeper, and waits. Sign 7. You carry other people's weight without being asked. You walk into a room, and within 90 seconds you know who's fine and who's pretending. You know which couple had a fight in the car. You know which kid isn't okay. Nobody told you. You just walked in, and it landed on you. And then you carried it home, and you prayed about it in the shower. For people who will never know you did. Here's the hard part of this one, and I'm not going to soften it. This will drain you if you never learn what to set down. Some of what you feel is yours to carry. A lot of it is not. And nobody ever taught you the difference. Because the people who could have taught you were busy telling you that you were too sensitive. You're not too sensitive. You're carrying without a strap. There's a way to carry that doesn't break your back. And most people who feel what you feel go their whole lives never learning it. Let me stop here for a second. Because I've been doing this long enough to know exactly what's happening in you right now. Somewhere around sign 4 or 5, you stopped listening like an observer and started listening like a person being described. Your chest got tight. Maybe your eyes did something you weren't expecting. That's not me being clever. That's recognition. And recognition is the Spirit's way of saying, I know. I've always known. And now you know that I know. There are messages that pass through your eyes, and there are messages that pass through your spirit. If something in you recognized itself while watching, don't dismiss it. That is the Spirit confirming what was already written. The secret protocol carries 7 keys that unveil what heaven deposited in you before you ever arrived, things no one around you has ever been able to name. It comes with the full audiobook for your moments of prayer, silence, and encounter with God. And you also receive the Awakening Map, the guide that illuminates the 5 seasons of spiritual awakening, revealing with precision exactly where you are and what comes next. The link is pinned in the first comment, but only for a limited time. Don't let this moment pass without a response. I'm not going to spend 3 minutes on that. You know whether it's for you or not. That knowing we talked about in sign 3, use it here. Now, 2 more signs. And these are the 2 nobody talks about. Sign 8. You have been delayed, and the delay has been specific. Not general bad luck. Specific. Doors that should have opened, didn't. Relationships that should have worked, unraveled at the last moment for reasons that never quite made sense. Opportunities that came so close you could taste them, and then evaporated. And meanwhile, you watched people with half your hunger and none of your depth walk straight into the thing you were praying for. You've asked God about this. Probably not politely. And he didn't answer in words. So let me say what I believe with everything in me. Some delays are discipline. Some delays are the enemy. And some delays are protection so precise that if you saw the full picture, you would drop to your knees in gratitude for every door that slammed. Gideon had 32,000 men. 32,000. And God said, too many. Send them home. 22,000 walked away that day. 10,000 left. And God said, still too many. And he cut it down again, 300 men. 300 out of 32,000. Every single one of those subtractions felt like loss to Gideon. Every one of them looked like the mission getting weaker. But God was not weakening Gideon's army. He was removing everything that would let anyone give the credit to something other than him. Think about what those 300 men had to watch. 22,000 of their brothers packing up and walking home in daylight. Then another 9,700 sent away after that. Standing there in a thinning field, watching the odds get worse by the hour, and being told this was God's doing. That's what your last few years have looked like from the outside. A thinning field. Your delay may be a subtraction, and subtraction is not abandonment. Subtraction is preparation for the kind of victory that leaves no room for confusion about who did it. Sign 9. You have tried to tell someone, and it did not survive the telling. This is the last one. And this is the one that answers the question in the title. Because at some point, maybe once, maybe 5 times you tried. You picked the safest person you knew, your closest friend, your spouse, a pastor, your mother. And you started to explain the thing. And you watched it die in the air between you. Not because they were cruel. Most of them weren't. They just didn't have anywhere to put it. Their face went polite. They said something kind and slightly off. Maybe they suggested you were tired, or stressed, or that everybody feels that way sometimes, and you finished the sentence differently than you started it. You wrapped it up small, and handed them something manageable instead. And then you went home and swore you'd never do that again. That's why these 9 signs cannot be shared. Not because they're forbidden, because they don't translate. They are experiential, not descriptive. You cannot hand someone the inside of your own spirit and expect them to hold it the way you hold it. And here is the thing that took me years to understand, and I want you to hear it clean. That's not a punishment. That's the nature of a root. Roots don't get seen. That's not a flaw in the design, that's the design. A root that grew above the ground so everyone could admire, it would be a dead root within a week. The hiddenness is not the problem. The hiddenness is the condition of the growth. Now let me tear the last piece of the lie down, because it's still standing and I can see it. The lie says, if all of this were really from God, someone would have confirmed it by now. That's the lie. That's the last brick. Let me take it out. Gideon asked for confirmation. Twice, with the fleece, wet fleece, and dry ground. Then dry fleece and wet ground. And God gave it to him both times without a word of rebuke. But look at when he asked. He asked after the angel had already appeared, after the fire had already come up out of the rock and consumed the offering, after he had already torn down his father's altar in the dark. He asked for confirmation while he was already obeying. That's the order. That's always been the order. The confirmation comes to the person who is already moving, not to the person waiting on the porch for a sign before they'll take the first step. You've been waiting for someone to see it, to name it, to say out loud, yes, I see what you are, and it's real. And I want to tell you plainly that human confirmation may never come the way you've been hoping for. Some of you are going to walk the whole distance without one person on earth fully understanding what you carried while you carried it. But the root doesn't need an audience to split the stone. It just needs to keep going. I want to tell you about a Tuesday, not a Sunday. Sundays are full. I'm talking about an empty church on a Tuesday afternoon, when the parking lot has 3 cars in it, and the sanctuary lights are half off, and the whole place smells like carpet and old hymnals. I found a woman in the 3rd row from the back a few years ago, 60-something. Her name was Dolores. She'd been coming in on Tuesdays for 11 years. 11 years of showing up to an empty building in the middle of the week. I asked her about it once. She said, I come because on Sundays, I have to be somebody. On Tuesdays, I can just be here. And then she told me something I've carried ever since. She said she'd spent most of her life believing she'd missed it, that there had been something God wanted from her when she was young and she hadn't recognized it in time, and now she was just running out the clock. Then she said, but I keep showing up, so maybe I didn't miss it. Maybe this is it. That woman prayed for people who had no idea she existed. She had a list. Names of people from a job she left in 1987. Names of the children of neighbors who'd moved away. She'd been holding those names in an empty room on a Tuesday for 11 years, and not one of those people knew. Roots don't get seen. Dolores passed 2 winters ago, and at the service, 3 separate people stood up and said, without knowing about each other, that they only made it through the worst year of their life because somebody had been praying. They didn't know who. The stone split anyway. So let me put the 9 back together, but not as a list. As a portrait. Someone who is most themselves alone, who receives what others cannot say, who knows before knowing is possible, who cannot settle in the wrong ground, who has been misnamed by the people closest to them, who refuses what goes down easy, who feels the room, who has been delayed, and specifically so, and who has tried to explain it and watched it fall apart in the air. Is that a broken person? Or is that a description of someone heaven has been working on underground for a very long time, in conditions that would have killed anything less durable? You have spent years apologizing for the shape the pressure made in you. Stop. The pressure is why you can go where the shallow-rooted can't follow. You didn't get the easy soil. You got the stone, and you grew anyway sideways, downward, slowly in the dark, without applause. That's not a defect. That's the whole point. Here's what I want you to do. Go back to sign 9, the one about trying to tell someone and watching it not survive. I want you to tell me about that attempt. Not in general specifically. Who did you try to tell? Where were you when you tried? What was the sentence you started? And what did you change it to halfway through? Write it in the comments. Even a few lines. Because I promise you this, the moment you put that down, somebody scrolling past at midnight is going to read your words and realize they've been holding the exact same unfinished sentence for years. And for once, it will have survived the telling. That's how the stone starts to split. I'll be reading. May the root under the rock in you keep going deeper than anyone can see. May the delay hold you, not lose you. And may you live long enough to see what your hidden years were building, and to watch the ground finally open up above you.